Hi, this is Professor Shore. This is another tutorial for CIS 115 that will talk about how to use methods in our class file to create functionality. So we're going to look today at a kinetic energy application. It's going to take the mass in kilograms, the velocity in meters per second, and calculate the kinetic energy in joules of our object. This is a common thing to calculate in the realm of physics. For this example, we're going to create a method named kinetic energy that will accept the arguments of the object's mass in kilograms and the velocity in meters per second and output into a given output mechanism the amount of kinetic energy in joules. We'll also create our standard Windows form to make this happen. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by creating a new project, and we're going to choose the Windows Forms app in C#, and we're going to call it KE for our project name. We don't have to get fancy with it. I'm going to put that in my standard projects folder, CIS 115, using the Net Framework 4.7.2, and click Create to get started. And again, as per usual, this is only going to give us our Windows form and a blank slate to get things started. I'm going to go ahead and start off by making this a little smaller because it's a fairly simple app. I'm going to also, because we're in the initial parts of designing this, go ahead and open the toolbox and pin it open. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a label at the top and change the text to kinetic energy calculator. Oops. And I'm going to do a text align to middle center. And also notice this is, we can already tell this is not very large, so I'm going to change the font to about twice that. So I'm going to go 16. There we go. And then move that back to the middle. I mean, this isn't an absolute requirement, but it does make the application look a little more professional, a little more finished. So I'm going to start off by adding a label here. And this label is going to be our mass label for our first data entry. And then I'm also going to go ahead and, even though it's not absolutely required, I'm going to make its name match what it is. So it's a label mass. And then I also want to add another label for the velocity. And I want to change the text for that. And again, that's in meters per second. And I'm going to right align those two. You saw the little alignment line drop down when it got equal to the velocity. Now we need a couple of text boxes to put information in. So I'm going to add a text box here. Oops. We'll finish that up once we get some more information into this. Again, this is text box mass. So I don't need anything there, but I'm going to align this. Notice how the alignment line turns purple and is slightly off the bottom of the text box when that is aligned with the text in our label. Okay, so now I need one more text box. And that is going to be our TB velocity. And again, I'm going to adjust that just a little bit. Okay. Next, we need some place to put our output. And for this particular project, I'm just going to put a label in here. And I'm going to start with it all the way over to the left. And I'm going to do a couple things to this. One is give it a proper name, label KE. I want to turn off the auto sizing. See, right now by default it's set to true, and I want to set that to false, and I want to make it bigger vertically and drag it all the way across to the other side. And I need to get rid of the text that's in there, and notice it doesn't go away like you might have had happen to you in the previous assignments. Because I've taken away the auto sizing, it has remained open and large. I wanted to set the text align to middle center, and I want to go ahead and make this a little bigger than the default, because we're going to find that this 8.25 is pretty hard to see on a big screen, on a high resolution modern screen. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to like a 14. Okay, so that's all that we need to do with that. I'm going to move it down just a little bit. There we go. Now we need the things that cause us to have action on our application. So we need a couple of buttons. And one is going to be our calculate button. And I'm going to go ahead and make that a little bigger too, like 12. And make it a little bit bigger button. And change the text. Calculate. It's already set to middle center. It's pretty typical stuff for a button. Got to change its name. BTN calculate. And then do the same thing for this other button. Button exit. Again, always good to have an exit button so you can cleanly close a desktop app. And we're going to change the font like we did in the previous one. Let's see, where'd the font go? There we go. And again, change the size like we did with the calculate button. Okay, So we should have all the controls we need. I can go ahead and unpin the toolbox and start by clicking on the calculate button, and that automatically creates our shell for our function that's going to happen when we click on the calculate button. So we need to control things in this click event. One of the things that we need to do is verify whether the user put in text into those two text boxes. So let's go if text box mass dot text does not equal. Now, if this were a number that we were comparing, we'd do null. But since this is a string, we just need to do a double parenthesis, a quote mark, and then we're going to do and we need to make sure that the text box velocity text is the same way. If these two things are true, then we're good to go, because that means there's information in the text box. Otherwise, right, remember this is how we control things in our applications. If this is true, we do something else, we do something else. In this case, we need to tell the user by putting something in that label, the output label box. So we need to do a label KE, because that's where we're going to put our text, but in this case we're just putting an error message or an indicator to the user. And that is, we're going to tell them you must enter data in the text boxes. And that's all we need to tell them. And that'll just fall through once that happens, and away it goes. So we go back up here to our actual code that's going to generate this calculation. So we now know that the TB mass and the TB velocity both have data in it. So now we need to pull that data using the parse function like we've seen before. So we're going to do a double mass equals double parse and we're going to grab that TB mass so that should give us our double value for mass, and then we need double velocity. Okay, so now we have the mass velocity. We know what the output's going to be. What we're going to do in this particular example is demonstrate how to use a method, a function within our page class that is going to calculate the kinetic energy, push it into the value, into the display and on the application, and then return. Okay, so here we go. We need to create a function. If you go back to the description, we need to create kinetic energy as our function. So we're going to do kinetic energy. And then we're going to pass it mass and velocity. And that's all done. But, this is always the thing you got to be watching for. Notice the red squiggle has appeared under that name. And what this is saying is the name does not exist in the current context. It doesn't exist. But that's what we're going to do next. Okay. So if you noticed when we double clicked on our button, we created private void. That is a data type and essentially, like, think of it like a security mechanism. It's private, so that means it's only available inside this form, this app. It has a return type of void, which means it doesn't return anything. So we're not going to return anything to this from this function. It doesn't need to. That's why if you look when we called it, there's nothing there. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a new method. So private void kinetic energy double, because we got to tell it what types to expect. And I'm just going to call it M for mass and double V for velocity. Okay, so there we're all set and ready to go. We've got our values. So now what we need is double KE. And we're just going to do our calculations. So it's 0.5 times M times V squared, which is V times V. There's other ways we could do that, but for our purposes here, this is a very simple way to do that. Now we need to output that into our display on the application. So we're going to call that. We're going to set the text of that. So that's label ke dot text equals ke dot toString. And what's really cool about strings in the C family of languages, you can just add them. So I'm going to just do plus space joules. And that's it. And then because we're in a method, I'm going to return to where it came from. Okay. Now we have one other item to take care of, and that's a real easy one. I'm going to double click on the exit, go back, and use a this dot close to exit the application. And that should be it. Relatively simple. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a build before we try to run it. I always like to run a build just to get straight in my mind that, yeah, all my syntax was correct. Okay, one succeeded. Okay, so now I can run it. So start. Now, the first thing I want to test is what happens if I don't put any numbers into those text boxes. Yay, our error message was correct. Now, I mean, there's a couple other ways we could have handled this, right? I could have made that text red, but then I would have had to mess with the color when I went to put the real thing in there. We could have put it in a notice box that popped up. A lot of ways we could do that. So let's just try Put in a couple of numbers in there, calculate, boom. Notice our joules works really well for that. Now, we'll run into a problem eventually. Let me go ahead and put 10,000. Again, remember, the velocity is getting squared. So that's going to get to be a really big number fast. So if I calculate that, well, that's not too bad. So we're up to 50 million joules. That's pretty intense, by the way. So, and now, just to finish it off, test. Exit. Leaves the program. No problems at all. So I'm going to close all my tabs. All my applications saved. And we're done. So I'm going to close the solution and bid you good night. And I hope you have enjoyed watching how to use a very simple method to do a simple calculation and present the finished product.